Hi, everybody. Good to be back on day 2. And like Marcel said, we are going to kick off the topic area about voluntary carbon credits. Your speakers today are myself and Christian, our head of finance for Germany. And we are going to talk about VCC, virtual carbon credits, what's going on in this market. Then we will touch upon this emission trading, what does it mean and how does it work? We are going to give a short overview about the regulatory environment in which all of this happens. And then we come to the part why we are here at this conference, the tokenization of virtual carbon credits. Why should you choose to do that? What are the benefits from that? And then we'll take a look on the regulatory implications of this tokenization of carbon credits. And with that, Christian, all yours.
Thanks, Florian. And I'm taking off with the old side of things, so no digitalization, just explaining what VCCs are, voluntary carbon credits, and how the market is currently developing. The first slide is, why does it matter? It's a new market, and you see the various players there who are tapping, in particular as exchanges, as trading venues for these new kind of asset classes. You see the Deutsche Börse with their commodity exchange, the EEX in Leipzig. You see Air Carbon Exchange here. They're based in Singapore and Abu Dhabi. So it's a global venture, this new kind of carbon emission trading, and some other basically sources and press lines in Malaysia and also the London Stock Exchange. So that's just kind of why does it actually matter? A lot of players are working in that area. The next slide, and it's always good to show slides where the graphs are exploding. And here you see that it's a market which is developing and massively and rapidly. When you start now, the current figures, and it doesn't matter what kind of data we look at here and where this data is actually coming from, because you see the gigatons per year here, which are voluntarily offsetted by carbon credits. And when you look at that, 2020, you have a multiplier of 15 until 2030. And when you see then the survey, it will be a multiplier of over 100. And why is that? Everyone is feeling that because the environment matters. And to get rid of the emission or regulate the emission and the allowances in that respect, that's the whole key of VCCs and emission trading. And when we look at the trading, we need to distinguish 3 markets. The first one is the regulated market. That's the one you probably know, the EU allowance trading on CO2 emissions. That's the official market, where basically from the supranational agreements, every country gets kind of apportioned certain allowances, and then they will be distributed into the industry. And we call that a downstream impact on climate. It's regulated to kind of limit the amount of CO2 from the industry, and that's the kind of the vehicle on that. Highly regulated. These kind of EU allowances are financial instruments, so heavily regulated. Then we have a second market. I wouldn't say it's lightly regulated, but it's also regulated. These are national markets which establish also itself on the emission trading system, because we have only CO2 on the EU level. And here, for example, in Germany, we have the burning of fossil fuel as one market which is then traded, where if you burn fossil fuel, you need a certificate. That's basically here in Germany, the Brennstoff Emissionshandel, which applies here, but it's nationally regulated. Here it's an upstream, so it's not like you limit the emission, but you try to, if you put dirt into the air, you need a certificate. So you're not kind of avoiding the emission at all. And the voluntary market is exactly the same. It's voluntary, it's privately based, and it aims to offset unavoidable emissions into the air, and that's a private market which has these figures as I've explained, and there are credits then generated by projects offsetting the emissions into the air. Here's an example which we got from one of our clients, Shell, just to explain what is actually behind that. And if you look at that, you see, CO2 emissions which exist, which you can't avoid. If you fly a plane, they are there. And then the CO2 is in the air, and then through the VCC project, so actual projects are underneath every kind of certificate, you plant a tree, you offset that with a CO2 credit, so there's a certificate that someone, so the project provider is stating, hey, I have planted that tree, and then that credit will be used and basically burned, cancelled, retired when I'm using that in light of a plane flight. So that's basically the entire magic about this entire voluntary carbon credits. And perhaps here's now a good spot of what are they actually from a legal point of view. They are not a financial instrument. That's currently the case. They are not regulated because in the end, the certificates are just certifying from someone, a project provider, I have planted a tree. That's it. They may be, depending on how they are designed, they may be a kind of a claim against the provider that actually, please, you have promised planting a tree. But in a sense, is then an other right, we call that in the legal community. So not a financial instrument, not a security, not highly regulated currently. And then we come to the regulated space, and that's then the interaction with this voluntary market. If you look at that, and I'm not going into the detail of all that regulation on the EU level and also not on the UK level, but what it shows is that at the EU level, and if you print out all the regulation around basically ESG, and in particular the green part of that, it's over 1,000 pages, so you cut a lot of wood printing these regulations out there. One is a taxonomy, which basically designs, it's basically a definition booklet, which states what is actually regarded as green. And you have seen and heard about all the kind of nuclear power and whether that's really green and that political agreement on that. It's all on the taxonomy. You define what is actually green and what is social and what is the governance around that. That's the taxonomy. And then around that definition, a lot of regulation, hardcore regulation, is then targeting to the behavior of the market players to drive their behavior into that direction of ESG. For example, in the finance industry, you have the disclosure regulation, which basically regulated entities are obliged to disclose how green is the financing, how risky is it in light of environmental. And you see one important one, the sustainable reporting standards, which require companies to basically provide a green balance sheet. So how green are they? What risk is in the company? And that's the driver why the VCCs matter, because if you have a dirty business and you produce steel, you need not only the classical regulated EU allowances, but also you want to offset that in your business and in your green balance sheet with the VCCs. And that's the whole driver why that market is exploding. Now, last slide from me on the old side before we look then on the digitalization side is the demand is rising massively in that space. So there's a huge opportunity. It's driven by the supranational agreements. Here's the Paris Agreement mentioned. You see the national level, certain regulated trading facilities developing, and the trend is looking exactly to continue. You see the voluntary market is increasing as well, and rapidly on a global level. So the emission trading systems are around the world getting in kind of in the mode to cope with that volume. And the last bucket, blended landscape. I think there is then a lot to do to blend that trading and the projects into the regulated world, the national level, but also then the voluntary world. And we will see here also changes from the governments in that respect in order to make that not only the trading, but also then the retiring and the entire ecosystem of VCCs viable and workable for the future. And that's all from me. Now over to Florian on the digitalization side of the VCC trading.
Thank you, Christian. And I think everybody here who is in that DLT crypto space has heard from the part Christian mentioned all the right buzzwords, right? It is a right, it is something, there are markets, you can trade it, is it international? You need to offset something. So it is a very, very good use case to think about, well, can't I tokenize that? Because if I tokenize that, I enhance transferability of those VCCs, of those virtual carbon credits. I create a tradability. Wouldn't it be a lot easier to have that right, the difficult thing to define in a token, and then all I have to do is agree, hey, I want to transfer or trade that token with you, right? I have a clear mechanism how to define ownership, and I can ensure very easily, due to the general architecture of DLT, that there's no double spend, which is actually part of the key promise of VCCs, right? If you sell the planted tree a couple of times, the whole point gets kind of useless. So it is a very, very good use case in principle for the tokenization of those VCCs. The question then arises, as Christian said, most likely, most of them are not yet regulated financial instruments. If I tokenize them, does that change the regulatory nature of those? If this were the case, that could have wide-ranging implications. Why? Because if it's a financial instrument, or under German law, if you want to discuss that more closely for Germany, if it becomes a crypto asset, then it becomes a financial instrument. And if you're providing services around those financial instruments, those are most likely to be banking business or financial services, and that might require you to get a financial regulatory license, which is, kind of onerous and will draw you into regulation. It's very expensive and might be difficult for many of those businesses out there. So let's take a look. Is that really the case? Can that be that the tokenization of something that is not a financial instrument lead to the qualification of a financial instrument? And if you look at that from a German law perspective, like I already mentioned, the starting point is the definition of a cryptowert, a crypto asset, as it is in the German Banking Act. And there it states, crypto assets are digital representations of a value, that is, I'm shortening that a little bit, that is accepted by natural or legal persons as a means of exchange or payment or for investment purposes by virtue of an agreement or actual practice, and can be transmitted, stored, and traded electronically. So I think those are the three key points. Is it a digital representation of value? And like Christian said, well, there are markets there, people are speculating, people are buying, you can trade it. Well, I think it will be really hard to argue that this is not something of a value. You have to buy it in order to get it. So probably yes. The question then, is it used for payments or something? Probably not. But is it accepted for investment purposes? And there it becomes a little bit tricky, because originally what the legislator had in mind for investment purposes, a crypto token, a financial instrument, is something like IOU, or you get a membership right of an organization or something. And this is something that's clearly not happening here. But the definition is a lot wider. It doesn't have to be only by design. It's also sufficient that there's generally an investor-like expectation that if I have that, I can invest in that, yeah? That there's a change of value, that you can trade it, there's a fluctuation, and that it can make me money. And I think this is going to be really hard to argue that this is not the case, given all the markets and the possibilities around VCCs and around tokenized VCCs. And I think the last point, transmitted, stored, and traded electronically, yes, I think that's also a given if you think about tokenization of those assets. So if that is true, then yes, indeed, the tokenization would change the regulatory nature and it would draw you into that financial regulatory regime. So let's think about that from a little bit more of a dogmatic perspective. Can this be something that is untokenized, not a financial instrument? I tokenized that and now it is. And I think the answer is probably yes, because the tokenization leads to a change of function. You have that enhanced tradability, transferability, and this inherently changes the legal nature. And BaFin has stated that in connection with Vermögensanlagen, investment objects, where it says, well, if you tokenize a Vermögensanlage, then you enhance that tradability, and that makes it to a security, to a financial instrument. So that would be in line with the expectation of BaFin. Then secondly, you have to keep in mind this whole definition of crypto assets has come into the law in the connection with the 4th AML directive. So there's the strong need to tackle AML. And if you think about it, you have something of value that can be transferred easily, internationally even. Of course, there are AML risks around that. So from that perspective, it makes also sense. And then last but not least, the investor protection issue. Like Christian mentioned, you really have to have that tree behind that. And you have to ensure that nobody loses the token, your investment purpose. So I think from all those dogmatic reasons, yes, again, it seems likely that this is the case. And so that means under German law, you're most likely going to be captured as a financial instrument if you're tokenizing your virtual carbon credits. That's only for Germany. You would have to look at that specifically from other countries. If MiCA comes along, and I think the colleagues will allude to that in the next presentation a little bit more in more detail, so I'll spare you that, but the definitions are rather wide, so I'm very excited what they have to say about that. I think there are workarounds, but all those workarounds would probably entail getting kind of rid of that token and using that in a different sense. So we are outside, happy to talk to you about that and take your questions on that regard. Thank you.